Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is with reference to the development that we have seen in Pakistan, and something, of course, that has been talked about in terms of accountability and consequences for quite some time now. And of course, we talk mostly about the political aspects and domains when we mention accountability, but it seems that what perhaps the people are also hoping for in terms of self-accountability by the military institutions has also come to the forefront, and this means that we have seen some sort of development coming in on the front that has been discussed for quite some time now. The former DG ISI, Faiz Hameed, has been taken into military custody, and a court-martial has also been initiated against him, and this is with regards to the case regarding the top city housing scheme. But of course, there are many other aspects to the story with reference to how Mr. Faiz Hameed has been involved in a lot of other areas and aspects that have put forward allegations on his meddling in terms of what has been going on with regards to the political domains of the country, both coming in with reference to, of course, various political parties. But whether or not we're going to be actually seeing any report moving forward with regards to that actually happening remains to be seen. We're also going to be saying what exactly will be the consequence of the top city housing scheme, and of course the Pakistan Army Act, under which, of course, he is investigated, and under the directions of the Supreme Court earlier, as well as per an investigative committee that was formed back in April, that of course has its own reports and has talked about how there has been serious allegations, and if true, of course, that is going to be something that is going to put a huge stint on the credibility of the state and its institutions. And now, of course, we've seen that the development has taken place with regards to his arrest, and then, of course, with regard to the court-martial being initiated. That is going to be our focus in the first segment, where we're going to be taking a look at this particular development and seeing what exactly is going to be the way forward in terms of the actions taken. Our next segment is going to be taking a look at what is going on around the world with reference to what we've been seeing happening in the Middle East, especially with a focus on the genocide in Gaza. And then, of course, in the aftermath of the attacks by Israel in Lebanon and Iran, it seems that the world is now worried about an all-out war and an escalation of this conflict in the Middle East. It's important, of course, to note that many countries, including the US, France, Germany, and the UK, have been calling for restraint, particularly when we talk about the responses coming in from Iran, that has spoken with regards to what it intends to do in terms of the retaliatory action and punishment after the ex-Hamas leader had been assassinated, and of course representing the Palestinian rights and moving forward with a truce agreement that was very, very important. And while the US is still pushing for the same, whether or not we're actually going to be seeing that happen is something that remains to be seen. And then what is going to be the situation on ground with the way that different countries, particularly Israel, US, and other allies, are involved, and what exactly will be the next steps as the world expects a response coming in from Iran. So we're going to be taking a look at that in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined for our first segment by Mr. Jamil Khan, who's a former ambassador, and Brigadier retired Mr. Waqar Khan, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for speaking with us and joining us in the debate today. And Brigadier Waqar, I'm going to start with you in terms of your perspective in the development earlier today. And of course, this has been something that had been talked about many times previously as well. But what exactly, in your opinion, does this count for, particularly when we talk about what we've seen previously and how involved there has been in terms of the allegations that we've seen coming in from various fronts, and then also the particular top city housing scheme under which this investigation took place? So I want your take first with regards to this particular arrest, and then, of course, the court-martial that has been initiated. Right, Waqar Sahab, can you hear me? Yes, Waqar Sahab, can you hear me? I think we'll come back to you, Waqar Sahab, and we're going to try and see that we can be more connected. But Jamil, Ambassador Jamil Sahab, we would like your perspective also with reference to what we've seen, and what exactly do you make of this? We've talked about the importance of accountability for quite some time now, and of course the pressure has been there for quite some time with reference to civil leadership, but it is something that the military has also promised in the credibility, and the effort to start an investigative committee was coming in from the military institution themselves in terms of their own self accountability. And what we've seen now in terms of justice seems to be on the forefront, particularly in the top city housing scheme. So I want your take first on this development before we move on. Yes, Ambassador Jamil, can you hear me? Unfortunately, I think both of our guests cannot hear me, but we're going to try and establish our connections once again. But Faisal, I'll come to you since you're here and there's no problem for you to hear me out. So your perspective on this particular development and what does this symbolize and what is the importance of this and what we're going to be seeing as a result of it?
Yeah, so now obviously if we look at the current situation right now, of course there is an importance of this case, but to me, I have been of course following the mechanism, the internal accountability mechanism of the military itself. I mean, it is nothing new for me, reason being military it has its own internal accountability mechanism that is intact all the time. And of course, you know, officers and even Jawans, if there is some anomaly from any of the you know, servicemen, of course they are taken to task. And some officers after post-retirement, they are required to of course maintain their posture in certain ways. If there is something that they couldn't have been you know, maintaining, then they are taken into charge as well. And that is why we are seeing that these cases are being brought forward of course against the former DG ISI General retired Faiz Hameed, Lieutenant General retired Faiz Hameed. And this is nothing new to me. There were generals before as well, 1-star generals, 2-star generals, 3-star generals. They have been taken to task, and this is how the internal accountability mechanism works. Yes, there is an importance in this context that of course he was found involved, and that is why he was being probed for you know, this top city scam or it was a property scam. He was somehow involved in it. It is being probed, and I think the probe when it comes to military as an institution, it's at best of the standards. And furthermore, the more important aspect of you know, today's press or press release, I must say, was that post-retirement, of course, there are certain issues related to politics. If there is, and that too is being probed, and if there is his hand or involvement being found in any of the charges, then of course there will be serious consequences for him as well in that context. And to me, overall, I think it should be taken up as a normal thing. Reason being, military as an institution has always maintained its accountability. Internal accountability mechanism is one of the strongest in Pakistan, I must say. Each and everything gets probed. If there is someone who has served Pakistan and on one of the toppest levels of his service, and to me, I think it should be taken in that way.
Right, absolutely. And of course, this impacts the way that everybody looks at the current situation and the influence that it creates in terms of these developments. And that aspect, of course, is important. But Farrukh, I also want your take in terms of this particular issue as well with the case of the top city housing scheme in relation to the reports that we've seen coming in with reference to other allegations as well in terms of political meddling and involvements. And while, of course, that still remains to be seen in terms of establishing whether or not that has taken place, there seems to be a lot of associations made with this particular name, and we saw that even this particular case has been followed very closely by the people of Pakistan, and so it's very representative of both the judiciary and also the military institutions in terms of their ability and in terms of their will to actually making sure that justice prevails. Do you see this development in this context?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. I think that first of all, let me remind everybody it is prudent to always avoid speculation in these matters because it concerns careers of people, very influential people, right? And we have seen in the past also how quickly things actually develop, and then they usually end up causing problems. But regarding this case, I'm sure that everybody who's watching us knows that this name, as you pointed out, Sana, has been in the news quite often, especially during the final days of PTI's government, and after that also, post that as well, especially in the past few years. What do we know so far? Regarding Top City, when this whole thing happened, he was not DGSI, he was DGC in ISI, right? A major journal post. And then what we are told is essentially post-retirement involvement in certain things. We don't know what those were. There is one thing missing here, and that is whether the later charges were domestic in nature or international in nature. So what we can say is, and remember, every time we talk about him, we end up calling him former DGI or DGISI. But his last post was as a Corps Commander Bahawalpur. And there were another post that he occupied before that as well. So essentially what we are seeing is that this probe, or at least this statement, seems to skip those three stages: when he was DGISI, when he was Corps Commander Peshawar, and when he was Corps Commander Bahawalpur. We still have to see the nature of what he is accused of, but it is clear that there are enough controversies, particularly the first one, where the whole thing starts, especially the presser starts. That actually highlights what kind of strange developments we might have seen, particularly given that that case, actually Top City's case, ended up with the Court of Law. It rose up to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and then it was referred back to the Defense Ministry, which has taken action. And with all those developments, of course, there are speculations about his the three posts that I mentioned, which were skipped. Remember the day when he retired, something very interesting happened. Pakistan was holding dialogue with TDP. All of a sudden, they announced that they are breaking up the talks and they are going to attack Pakistan. Similarly, even today when he is arrested, the news from our western border is strange. But whether it had anything to do with anything foreign, whether it had anything to do with anything political, we still have to wait and see. Otherwise, there's always the issue of personal conduct. And I think that that's why it is great. It is something new. It is unprecedented that somebody who has been in power at such positions has been not only taken to task, he is being disciplined, and he has also been taken into custody.
Right, absolutely. Brigadier Waqar, I'll come to you. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So Brigadier Waqar, I want your perspective also on this particular development. And while we, of course, discuss the way forward, especially in terms of how the process has been initiated of the court-martial, and then, of course, with reference to him, the former general also being taken into custody, it is important, of course, to understand how this process also works and what exactly will be the way forward when we talk about it. While, of course, we know that there has been an investigative committee that has sat down and talked about how serious allegations were and how they cannot be left unattended. I also want your take in terms of how exactly will we be able to determine what exactly has been found out and whether or not that report is going to be made public. How exactly will this particular process take place of the court-martial, and what exactly will be the way forward when we talk about this particular case, especially when we have the Supreme Court's involvement as well?
Yeah, I think first thing forthcoming is the accountability process, and the military has displayed it in the past also, even after 9th and before that. In case there could be two things. One is in service, errors or crimes committed, and the other is after you retire. In both cases, you are liable to be under the Pakistan Army Act, and especially if it is one thing we call in the military is conduct unbecoming of an officer. There is a section 55 to 59, and that covers your conduct, and that relates to maybe with civil or within military. So I think there are two parts. One, I think already Tafi Saab has highlighted of the Top City case, and in case there is an involvement, I'm sure so far there has been a proper court of inquiry, and the military has enough evidence to arrest him, because when you arrest any officer, whether he's a lieutenant or a lieutenant general, you should have, I think, enough evidence in the court of inquiry which warrants, and then they can proceed. There will be a summary of evidence which will be recorded, and then you pass through field general court martial, which is basically a military court by some senior officer, and but the defendant is allowed, or the accused is allowed to, bring his own counsel or advocate, and he can fight it openly within the military court. And in case he's innocent, he'll be free, and in case he's convicted, then there could be, there are different layers of punishment. It could be removal from the rank is taken. It could be, let's say, removal of your pensions and privileges, and maybe some punishment related to, rigorous imprisonment or something like that. But I don't know what are the kind of charges. There are two, I think, glaring things which are visible, that in service, he was found, as per the reports so far appeared in the media regarding the toxicity and pressurizing, which is definitely not allowed in the military. And after service, it was mentioned that it's related to conduct. So it could be, wild guess, but there are chances that maybe his involvement in some political activities which are of serious nature. And then also, I think something would come out from this trial also. It's not going to stop here, because I'm sure he has a lot of information to share in case he pleads guilty and then comes out with the facts. And if I think then it could have some linkages with internal or external factors, depending on how does it proceed. So I think a lot will come out from this trial as well, because initially it is the court of inquiry and summary of evidence. And I also feel that when ISPR says that he is already under trial, it means that probably it has started a couple of days or weeks before. So we are not very sure when he was taken into military custody. In my opinion, it could be a couple of days earlier, but now they have probably disclosed that this is going on, and it will be a speedier trial. It will be, I think, finished within 15 to 30 days.
I also want an understanding of what you mentioned earlier in terms of how an arrest only takes place when there is sufficient evidence. And while I understand that, you also spoke about how there will be a chance for the accused to be able to defend himself and to walk out without any charges. And so I want your understanding, particularly coming in from the institution, in terms of when such a step is actually taken by the military institution, and then to, of course, against such a senior officer, that they have taken him into military custody, that there is a process that has been initiated. Does that point towards the person being guilty? Because a lot of people, when we talk about this development, are already assuming that there has been a crime committed, that he is guilty, without this entire process taking place.
And I understand, Brigadier Saab, your point about presumption of innocence. But here's a question regarding how this works in the civilian domain. When somebody is, under investigation, there are interrogations that take place, and after that there is a trial, that it moves to trial as well. In this case, if somebody was being investigated, is there a chance that there was some kind of interrogation also, or it lies in the future just before the trial itself?
He still remains an accused, or mulzim. So if somebody says he's guilty or not, I think it will be decided by the court. Like court, field general court martial is like any, I think, I would say session or high court. The only difference is there are military officers who act as judges, and then there is a trial. So they'll bring their prosecution, counsels, and the defendant can bring his counsel, and it's a proper, proper proceeding in the, let's say, in the court. And the only difference is that you cannot, let's say, delay it through, flimsy excuses and all that. It is given a timeline, and generally they'll try. But I think whatever evidence they have collected, because arrest indicates that there's strong evidence. So it means that evidence has now to be presented in the court, and then it has to be proven, and then comes the, let's say, punishment, or let's say being guilty or not guilty. So that's why I'm saying that still he remains accused, but there is a strong evidence and which will be presented. But in case he can defend it, he can get scot-free. But I'm sure if such a senior officer is arrested, there are, I think, very strong evidence against him. The other is, of course, a message from the military, within the military, and also to the rest of Pakistan international community, that military is very particular about its discipline. You cannot disrupt chain of command. You cannot misuse your authority, and I think it should be welcomed by even civil courts and civil society. Generally, there is a perception probably senior officers in military are untouchable. It has been happened in the past also. You've seen after ninth May, 3 stars and 2 stars wherever there was slackness. Now it depends what was the kind of, let's say, charges and how they defended it. Some are given summary disposal, some are maybe faced court martials. But here I think we have an example not only of the rank but of a position. Like DJI is a very strong position, and in case military has proceeded, it also actually sets the bar very high for the officers who are going to follow, and officers who are going to be in these positions, and officers who are going to be subordinates, because I'm sure there are certain names related to his position who are working with him. I'm sure they'll also be facing trials. So it means that the bar is set now very high, morally and in discipline, that you cannot violate whatever the rules are, and also the civilian rules. We should follow the law. So that's, I think, the
Absolutely,
bottom line.
Brigadier Saab. And given that you did not speak to the interrogation point, let me ask you again regarding a distinction between court of inquiry and field court martial. What is the difference? When a court of inquiry takes place, does it involve any kind of interrogation, any kind of processes? What exactly is the nature of that?
And Brigadier Waqar, if you can also shed some light on the fact that if, during interrogation, there are certain names from the political side or from the bureaucracy side, if there are certain names which are being taken, will they be, probed by military courts, or they will be sent in towards the civilian courts? And once the decisions are made, the military court has decided the court martial is conducted, then that court martial, can it be challenged in the Supreme Courts, the higher courts, the civilian
Yeah,
side?
I think I'll just give you an example of the court of inquiry and the field general court martial. For instance, if there is an accused, there is a police, you've seen the prosecution by the police. There's a branch which does collect the evidence, and they also discuss it with the, if he's in a police remand or judicial remand, so there's already inquiries. It is a very similar process. It means that investigation has already taken place. He has been confronted with a list of questions, and definitely there is a digital forensic carried out. Maybe there's some documentary evidence, whatever. So whatever they have collected, and he's already been interrogated, because that is part of the court of inquiry, or it could be part of the investigation if you relate it to police. And then that police then files charges, or the attorney, and then it is taken to the court, and then proceeding starts. So it means when he goes to field general court martial, that process has been completed. Whatever evidence they could collect, he was confronted also in terms of investigation, and now he is there to defend it in the court. So it's something like that. Now coming to, let's say, because I feel that it's going to be a very high profile case, and there are chances, I'm not very sure, that there will be some linkages, especially if it relates to his political activity, because it was, I think, within 2 years of his retirement. In any case, you are not allowed, but even if you have passed 2 years and you are in a political party, there are certain red lines you cannot cross under the Pakistan Army Act. For instance, God forbid, you can't commit treason, you can't go against your institution. So those red lines are all. There are people who were charged even after 5 years of retirement. So that process is completed, and in case there is now evidence which relates to, let's say, for instance, there was a big conspiracy, and whosoever was involved, whether they were military, retired, veterans, or civilians, they will come into, let's say, into the net. And I feel that this trial is now going to throw a lot of, I think, names, and I don't know how does it proceed, depending on how he, let's say, comes up with his defense, or he pleads guilty, and or maybe he could maybe throws up certain big names. So we are not very sure, but it could lead to certain other investigations and prosecutions. Military, I think, has been always saying that when it relates to military institution, or it relates to military garrisons, stations, bases, air bases, it comes very much within the purview of military courts, and Supreme Court has just given a stay. They have not said yes or no. So probably a decision would come. So I think next 2 3 weeks are going to be very very important because they're going to wrap it up maybe by let's say end August or mid September. So still I think we'll have to wait how the process actually unfolds.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Brigadier Waqar, for joining us and being a part of the
Thank you.
debate. We'll now go to Ambassador Jamil Khan. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for joining us and waiting. With reference to, of course, what we have discussed so far, there is, of course, a lot of concern in terms of how this will go, but this is what Brigadier Waqar has actually explained it for us. But I want your perspective, particularly also from the civil and from the government's perspective or from the diplomatic perspective. How exactly are we looking at this particular situation and what this means for the country?
In fact, in the international arena, it was a general perception that the army officers, particularly the senior officers, they go scot-free, whatever they do. So that was the perception perceived or created. So I think this very trial, this very FGCM, what they call Field General Court Martial, that would address that problem to a greater extent. In fact, it's otherwise very unprecedented that such senior officers, yes, in the recent past, General Javed, there was Field General Court Martial conducted, and still life imprisonment is serving in the prison. And likewise, a brigadier was sentenced to their death, and there were so many other officers in recent past. But it is not brought to the public domain all the evidence and all the proceedings of the Field General Court Martial, except for a few liners. But this time we see that there's a lot of details, and perhaps the reason is that the Supreme Court had its indulgence in it, and Supreme Court had issued an order in this regard, particularly Top City case, which is a land scam. There's certain procedure which is also in my knowledge that whenever there is a Field General Court Martial order, it's a very senior officer, normally senior to the or the equivalent rank of the person who is being court-martialed under the Field General Court Martial. But one thing is very important, and parallel to the civil criminal justice system, a charge sheet is framed, like the charge sheet is framed in the court of law. So charge sheet is framed and presented to the president of the Field General Court Martial, which has the authority of a judge to hear both sides, the prosecution and the defense, and then later on give judgment. But that judgment is only implemented of the right of the individual officer or individual personnel of the armed forces, right of appeal and right of review. So once that is exhausted, the sentence is then executed. So a little more steps, just about the next 2 minutes time. The summary of evidence is collected. In fact, court of inquiry basically is meant, and that has already been conducted, and during which the people are not arrested, or the accused is not arrested normally, and that is mostly conducted to collect the evidence sufficient to convince the authorized officer who is authorizing the Field General Court Martial that it is a fit case for that. Because Field General Court Martial, it's a very speedy one, and after the charge sheet, both sides, prosecution and defense, which is selected from the armed forces, the army officers, one side is defended, and one side the prosecutor puts up all the evidence. And then opinion, for the opinion, it goes to the JAG branch, which is a Judge Advocate General. In our case, it's Attorney General, or for example, in the provinces, it's the Advocate General. And then the final appeal goes and all, and then the sentence is materialized. So coming back to the political and the diplomatic aspect of it, it's very unprecedented, and it's the second powerful person of the military or the armed forces who has been sentenced, at least in the known memory. But it's nothing new in the armed forces. In fact, in the past about couple of years, 7, 8, or 10 years, in the U.S. Army, there were about over 20 generals they were court-martialed, and in the UK Army, there were about 10 to 15 generals who were court-martialed. So court-martial is a very common phenomenon, and basically it is an internal matter, and very seldom it comes to the public domain. This time, as I said, because of the the Supreme Court indulgence and intervention, and the order, they had to really bring it in public in slightly more details, because previously also, but then there are very few items which are brought in it. So that is one aspect. The second aspect, General Faiz, I don't want to pass comments, but then probably if we try and rely on our memory, the kind of conduct which at least the eyes of the camera had seen it at the Kabul airport after the withdrawal of the Allied forces, having a cup of tea in a hotel gallery and posing for the entire world, that also came under a lot of criticism by the world community. So those kind of gestures, and then posing that perhaps the general was very close to the prime minister of that time. One thing in army I know is taken very serious in any army for that matter, that the generals start rubbing the shoulders with the politicians or the foreigners or the diplomats, because that is embedded in the Pakistan Army Act here in our country, and it is embedded in the Pakistan Army rules, embedded in Pakistan Army instructions. All these law books are meant to control the conduct of armed forces officer. So what I gather from the ISPR release of the details what they have issued in the public domain, and that is basically that some misconduct and multiple misconduct has happened, and they, in the court of inquiry, I'm sure they have collected the evidence for it, and that's why they have now charge sheeted and arrested him and in the field general court martial. So that is one aspect, and second is that Pakistan Army Act, it is quite very stringent so far as the conduct of the armed forces is concerned. Unlike the civil side, that it is delayed by the prosecution, it's delayed by the investigation. In the armed forces, it's very swift and it's timeline, and the presiding officer has an accountability to complete it in a stipulated time, unless there are some technical reasons, and there are multiple layers which is involved in reviewing the whole thing. So from that standpoint, I guess the court of inquiry was conducted in the manner it has been prescribed, and also the charge sheet has been made, and on the basis of that, the FGCM has started that the field general court martial. In fact, one thing I must try.
Yes. Yes, quickly, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, just for last 30 seconds, that some of the generals, if they start, lobbying with the politicians and the top politicians, that is very detrimental for any armed forces, may it be Pakistan Army or Pakistan military or anything. So General Faiz was in that, he unfortunately fell in that category, that he started rubbing his shoulders and started thinking of taking, and started aligning himself with the land mafia and all that. So that was really quite detrimental at that time also. I wish Army had taken some cognizance at that time, but probably he was too powerful. Yes.
Absolutely, and Ambassador, thank you for that analysis, of course. We'll also request you to stay with us for our next segment, but before that, Farrukh, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, two or three things, particularly the political bits that Ambassador Saab actually spoke about. Remember that the controversy actually was started by the former Prime Minister when he refused to relieve him from his post or replace him with the officer, right, as the DGSI. I think that was the time when everything exploded. Before that, there were whisper campaigns. So if there is any kind of speculation today, I think that foreign DGI, former DGI needs to actually blame that man who actually created that kind of atmospherics. Secondly, Faisal was talking about other people, politicians whose names might actually come up. And I remember, I'm sure that whosoever saw him when he was at the peak of his job or power, the kind of spinelessness of our politicians was incredible. I went to a couple of events, and he was being treated as if he is the second coming of some caliph or some kind of powerful person. And all politicians, cabinet ministers, are treating him as if he is the final word of wisdom. So I think that these concerns are serious. But once again, it will be prudent because the protest statement does not actually include his 3 tenures. And I am, by the way, interested more or less in his second last tenure as the not DGSI, but Corps Commander Peshawar. But we will wait and see what happens. Finally, one more thing, and that is regarding the internal dynamics. I think that before the appointment of new army chief, who is incumbent now, before that, the kind of dynamics that were there, that a former prime minister, right at the time of the appointment of new army chief, is actually, taking out a procession to Islamabad and is threatening to choke the federal capital. I think that kind of things give it bad taste. And I hope that this never actually comes back to haunt us. And those 3-4 years or 6 years, they are thoroughly investigated because there is going to be a lot of news that will come out of that.
Absolutely.
One liner, Sana.
Yes.
Very quickly. When it comes to, of course, a man of his caliber who has served Pakistan at a very higher level, I think we shouldn't be presuming so early anything about whatever the sort of charges are on him. It's a sub judice matter, and I think in coming days, one by one, things would start appearing.
Absolutely.
And I think very carefully this should be taken into account.
Agree.
As well.
Absolutely.
The only contour that I was talking about is 6 years when we saw incredible decline in the state's power. So that needs to be investigated regardless of him.
All right, we're going to now move on to our next segment, which takes a look at what is the situation in the Middle East. And Ambassador Saab, I'm going to take your perspective on this because we want to, of course, understand as we talk about what has happened in Gaza. Of course, this genocide continues and without, of course, any consequence. At the same time, now it seems that the world is more concerned or worried about an escalation of an all-out conflict, particularly after what we've seen coming in from within Iran, reports of a possible attack in the aftermath of what Israel has, of course, done in terms of the targeted attacks both in Lebanon and in Iran. So I want your take on, first, the possibility of this happening. And then secondly, while, of course, we see countries such as the UK, France, Germany, and the US calling for de-escalation, even moving forward with restarting and reigniting the truce agreement process, whether or not they will be successful and whether or not they're actually also preparing for a possible response in terms of supporting Israel if need be.
Well, first, the possibility of retaliation. That is, in fact, Iran was very candid even yesterday. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Deputy Commander has very explicitly defined that and explained that he's just waiting for the final order of the Supreme Leader, and then they would punish Israel in the manner they have already decided something. So he has already made that statement as fresh as yesterday. But then Supreme Leader himself is on record and publicly has said that Israel would be punished for the act. So one thing is for sure that like 1st of April, once they struck the consulate of Iran in Syria, and Supreme Leader had issued almost a similar kind of statement, which materialized later on. But in between 1st of April and 18th of April, once Iran conducted its attack on Israel, there was a huge diplomatic work which was done through the intermediaries, some of Switzerland, Oman, whose name has not really been taken much, but Oman had a very important role to play. And I, from my personal experience, also know that Oman has a very good relation with Iran, and also has of course, is a GCC member. So their mediation worked with the United States, and then they communicated through Oman and Switzerland and some more countries. So that worked. Even while we are talking, there's a lot of diplomatic work going on to not only de-escalate, but also reduce the intensity of the retaliation, which seems to be in the offing. Today, I think in the small hours of the morning or early morning, the defense minister of Israel was again very clear that he communicated with the Secretary of Defense, Austin, that they have exchanged the notes, and the Secretary of State, United States, has given a full assurance to Israel. They have already moved their Abraham Lincoln, the warship from the Pacific to the Gulf area just to support. And they have announced it, that they have already putting all their military assets around the Middle East just to support the possible attack and just to defend Israel. So one thing is for sure that the U.S. is lining up with Abraham Lincoln, with the aircraft carrier strike group, with torpedoes, with the electronic warfare, and all these assets are being placed. Now, at the same time, as you mentioned, there is a talk, and there are some of the European countries, allies of the United States. They are trying their best to implement the peace plan, which is a three-phase peace plan. But I have my doubt about it, because on one side, the Biden administration and Biden himself is making statements about the peace plan, and while he's making statements, he's releasing the war machine or the arms and ammunition of $3.5 billion for Israel. So there is definitely some dishonesty in it, I would say, if I may. And it is a contradictory act if we compare what the peace plan advocacy that the Biden administration is making and its allies, and what assistance they are giving it to the Israel at the same time, and what Israel is doing. Just day before yesterday, killing 100 innocent people just who had been displaced multiple times, 10 times displaced, and then they bombed them and killed almost 100 people. So all these things, if we compare it.
Ambassador Saab, I'm glad that you're talking about the whole picture. But one assumption that I found was that perhaps if there's going to be any retaliation, it is going to be airborne, and it is going to be in the shape of missiles or something else. Now, what we have learned so far, the way Hania's assassination actually took place, it might have actually had local actors involved as well. So is there a possibility that retaliation might not need airspace, or for that, especially given that there are so many countries involved and surrounding Israel, and it might not be easy to procure the airspace of every country to attack Israel?
And
Thank you. I thought that.
I thought your question finished.
Okay,
No,
carry on. Yes, Farrukh.
Okay, regarding the nature of attack, is it essential that it comes from Iran and it is a direct one, or there can be something else?
Well, Iran has kept all the options with itself, as they have announced. But it appears one thing, and that seems quite plausible and logical, that it has to have more intensity, as the Supreme Leader says, and as the guards are saying, Revolutionary Guard. It has to have some more intensity to show the world that Iran can protect its integrity and sovereignty. Number one. Number two is Iran has already demonstration that it can strike from its soil to Israel, as it has done last time. Now, to what extent the diplomacy, which I was mentioning, multiple countries are doing that, if at all the strike has to take place, the retaliation has to take place, it should take place in a slightly low intensity with not harming very major cities and major population of Israel. So my analysis is based on the past pattern of Iran, which was a recent one, as I said, between 1st of April and the 18th of April, what all transpired and what statements were given in the media. So based on that, and based on the indicators which I was just mentioning, the conversation between the defense secretary of the United States, which is defense minister, and the defense minister of Israel about strengthening their position. Coming back to Mr. Pitafi's this theory and question that yes, Iran is already fully prepared. In the last 20 years, Qasem Soleimani has established its proxy, maybe shape of Hezbollah, maybe shape of Houthis, maybe shape of militia in Syria, militia in Iraq, and there are some more assets which during my tenure as an ambassador, I've been hearing from those respective countries that Iran has its splinter groups in those countries as well. So it appears that, and United States has already shown its concern that it has its bases, it has its assets in all these countries, and they have warned Iran that if anything happens to their bases, the United States would retaliate. So there are 2 points here. The United States has already issued.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador Jamil. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you very much for joining us and being part of the debate. Thank you, Faisal, and thank you, Farrukh, as always. And that's all that we have from the debate at the moment, but we'll be back tomorrow with more news from around the world and from Pakistan. Stay tuned.